The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday afternoon when David walked through the tall glass doors of the Riverside Performing Arts Center. His old sneakers made squeaking sounds on the shiny floor, and he could feel people staring at him. He didn't belong here. And everyone could tell. David was 23 years old. But right now, he felt like a kid who'd wandered into the wrong building. His jacket was still damp from the bus stop, and his jeans had a small tear near the knee. He'd come straight from his night shift at the packaging warehouse, and he hadn't had time to go home and change. Under his arm, he carried a crumpled piece of paper that he'd found pinned to a bulletin board at the public library 2 weeks ago. It was an audition notice for a music scholarship. The lobby was beautiful in a way that made David uncomfortable. Everything was white, marble, and gold trim. There were fancy paintings on the walls, and a chandelier that probably cost more than he'd make in 5 years. A woman in a neat blazer gave him a look as he walked past, the kind of look that said, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" David wasn't sure, but he kept walking anyway. He'd almost turned around 3 times on the way here. Once at the bus stop, once outside the building, and once more in the lobby. But something kept pushing him forward. Maybe it was his grandmother's voice in his head, telling him that opportunities don't come twice. Maybe it was just stubbornness. Either way, his feet kept moving toward the auditorium doors. Inside the auditorium, the director sat in the front row with 3 other people. Her name was Elizabeth Hartley, and everyone called her Mrs. Hartley. She had gray hair pulled back tight and glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from sitting through dozens of auditions in one day. Next to her sat 2 famous piano teachers and a younger woman with a clipboard who kept checking her watch. David cleared his throat as he walked down the aisle. The sound echoed in the big, empty space. Mrs. Hartley looked up from her papers, and her expression wasn't welcoming. Behind her, he could see a few staff members sitting in the back rows. They'd stayed late to watch the last few auditions, probably hoping to see something interesting after a long day. "You're the last one," Mrs. Hartley said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "Name?" "David Cooper, ma'am." One of the piano teachers, an older man with a gray beard, leaned over and whispered something to Mrs. Hartley. She nodded and wrote something down. David couldn't hear what they said, but he saw the man glance at David's clothes and shake his head slightly. "And your background, Mr. Cooper? Where did you study?" This was the moment David had been dreading. He swallowed hard and tried to keep his voice steady. "I didn't go to music school, ma'am. I taught myself. I work nights at a warehouse to help support my family, and I practice whenever I can." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then someone in the back rows laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a quick snort. But in the quiet auditorium, it might as well have been a shout. David felt his face get hot. The woman with the clipboard whispered something to Mrs. Hartley, who sighed deeply. "Cooper, do you understand that this scholarship is for students who plan to pursue professional careers in classical piano? This isn't a community talent show." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. And you're self-taught?" The bearded piano teacher spoke up now, his tone making it clear what he thought about self-taught pianists. "No formal training? At all? My grandmother taught me the basics when I was young, sir. After she passed, I kept learning, on my own." More whispers from the panel. David could see them exchanging looks, the kind of looks that said they'd already made up their minds. The younger woman with the clipboard was actually checking her phone now, not even pretending to pay attention anymore. Mrs. Hartley put her glasses back on and gestured toward the stage with one hand, like she was swatting away a fly. "Well, we've already kept everyone here past 6 o'clock. Go ahead and play something. Make it quick." David walked up the steps to the stage, his legs feeling shaky. The grand piano sat in the center, black and glossy, under the stage lights. It was a Steinway, the kind of piano he'd only ever seen in videos online. He'd never actually played on anything this nice. The best piano he'd ever touched was the old upright in the college practice room he snuck into on weekends. As he sat down on the bench, he heard more whispers from the back of the auditorium. He caught a few words. Waste of time. And what was she thinking? Letting him audition. The bearded teacher was shaking his head and had already started gathering his papers, clearly ready to leave. David's hands were shaking as he adjusted the bench height. He looked down at the keys. Perfect and white and waiting. For a second, panic hit him hard. What was he doing here? These people had spent their whole lives in fancy music schools. They'd had private teachers and master classes, and probably started playing before they could walk. Who was he to think he belonged on the same stage? Then he thought about his grandmother. She'd been a real pianist back in Korea, performed in concert halls and everything. But when she came to America, nobody cared about her degree or her talent. She'd worked in a laundry service for 30 years, her skilled hands pressing other people's clothes instead of piano keys. She'd kept one old keyboard in the back of her closet, and twice a week, she'd pull it out and teach little David everything she knew. He remembered her wrinkled hands, guiding his small fingers to the right keys. Music is a language, she used to say. It speaks when words fail. And it doesn't care about fancy schools or expensive suits. It only cares if you mean it. 1. She. About word. 1. She. David took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Hartley's sigh again, impatient and annoyed. The bearded teacher had stood up, ready to walk out. The staff members in the back were probably thinking about their dinner plans. None of them knew what was about to happen. None of them could have guessed that in about 30 seconds, everything in that room would change. The mockery, the dismissive looks, the assumption that this tired young man in worn-out clothes couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer, all of it was about to be turned upside down. David closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought about every late night spent practicing on that old keyboard in his tiny apartment. He thought about every time someone had told him to be realistic, to give up on silly dreams. He thought about his grandmother's smile when he'd played for her, and the way she'd cry happy tears and tell him he had a gift. Then he pressed down on the first key, and everything changed. The first note rang out clear and pure, filling every corner of the auditorium. It was a single note, but there was something about the way David played it that made it different. The sound seemed to hang in the air, perfect and controlled, like he'd captured something precious and was offering it to everyone in the room. Mrs. Hartley's pen stopped moving across her paper. She looked up slowly, her eyes focusing on the young man at the piano. The bearded teacher, who'd been halfway out of his seat, froze. The woman with the clipboard actually dropped her phone. The second note came, then the third. David's fingers began to move across the keys, and suddenly everyone realized what he was playing. It was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most difficult pieces any pianist could attempt. This wasn't some simple song. This was the kind of music that separated the amateurs from the masters. In the back rows, the staff members who'd been whispering stopped talking. The room became so quiet you could hear the rain still falling outside, tapping against the tall windows. But inside, there was only the piano, and it was singing. David's hands moved like they belonged to someone else. His fingers flew across the white and black keys, hitting each note with impossible accuracy. The technical passages that made music students cry in frustration seemed to flow out of him like water. But it wasn't just that he could play the notes. Anyone could memorize notes if they practiced enough. What David was doing was different. He was feeling every single moment of the music. You could see it in the way his shoulders moved with the rhythm, in the slight tilt of his head when the melody shifted. His whole body was part of the performance. When the music got soft and sad, his touch on the keys became gentle, almost like he was afraid to break something fragile. When it built up to the powerful parts, his hands struck with confidence and strength. Mrs. Hartley leaned forward in her seat. Her mouth had fallen open slightly, and she didn't even notice. She'd been directing this performing arts center for 27 years. She'd heard thousands of auditions, watched countless talented students perform. But this was something she hadn't seen in a very long time. Maybe ever. The bearded teacher, Professor Williams, slowly sat back down. He'd taught at the Manhattan Conservatory for over 3 decades. He'd trained pianists who went on to win international competitions. He'd heard some of the best young talent in the world. And right now, watching this kid in torn jeans play on their stage, he felt something he rarely felt anymore. Genuine surprise. The music kept pouring out. David hit a particularly challenging section. A part where the left hand and right hand have to play completely different rhythms at the same time, while maintaining perfect timing. It was the kind of passage that took conservatory students months to master, with professional teachers guiding them. David played it like he'd been doing it his whole life. The younger woman with the clipboard, whose name was Rachel, quietly reached for her phone again. But this time she wasn't checking messages. She opened the camera app and started recording. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held up the phone. She had a feeling that she was watching something special, something that people would want to see. In the back of the auditorium, a janitor named Frank had paused his work to listen. He'd been cleaning these halls for 15 years, and he'd heard plenty of music floating through the building. Most of it was good. Some of it was great. But this was different. Frank didn't know anything about classical music or fancy techniques. He just knew that what he was hearing was making his eyes water, and he couldn't explain why. David's face showed everything he was feeling. When he played the yearning, lonely parts of the concerto, you could see years of struggle written in his expression. Every late night spent practicing while his friends were out having fun. Every time someone had told him he was wasting his time. Every double shift at the warehouse, when his fingers ached and his back hurt, but he still came home and practiced for 2 more hours. The music swelled into a powerful crescendo. David's fingers raced across the keys, playing runs that sounded like waterfalls. His whole body moved with the effort, but his face showed something else. Not strain, but release. Like he'd been holding something inside for years, and finally had a chance to let it out. Mrs. Hartley felt her eyes getting wet. She blinked quickly, trying to maintain her professional composure. But it was hard. The music was touching something deep. Something she'd almost forgotten was there. She remembered why she'd gotten into this profession in the first place, back when she was young and believed that music could change the world. Professor Williams was shaking his head slowly, but not in dismissal anymore. In wonder. He recognized the little details that most people would miss. The way David shaped each phrase with musical intelligence that couldn't be taught from a book. The dynamics. The subtle changes in volume that gave the piece depth and emotion. The rubato. The slight speeding up and slowing down that made the music breathe like a living thing. Impossible. Williams whispered to himself. This is impossible. Allo. But it was happening right in front of him. This young man who'd never set foot in a proper music school, who'd taught himself from library books and internet videos, was playing like someone who'd trained at the finest conservatories in the world. No, it was more than that. He was playing with a depth of feeling that many trained pianists never achieved, even after years of study. The third panelist, a woman named Dr. Chen, who'd been silent until now, leaned close to Mrs. Hartley. "Do you see his technique?" she whispered. "Look at his hand position, his finger curves. Someone taught him properly. Those are classical fundamentals." Mrs. Hartley nodded, not taking her eyes off David. "His grandmother," she whispered back. "He said she taught him the basics." "She must have been exceptional," Dr. Chen replied. "You can't get that foundation from YouTube videos." The music moved into a quieter section, and David's playing became soft and intimate. It was like he was sharing a secret with everyone in the room. His fingers barely seemed to touch the keys, yet every note was clear and perfectly placed. This was the hardest kind of playing, the kind that required complete control and confidence. Rachel kept recording, making sure to keep the phone steady. She knew this video would be important. She could already imagine it being shared, going viral, showing the world what real talent looked like when it had been hidden away and finally got a chance to shine. Frank, the janitor, had stopped working completely now. He stood in the back, his mop leaning against the wall, forgotten. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. He'd come to America 30 years ago with nothing. He'd worked hard jobs, sent money home to his family, and never complained. This music, somehow, felt like it understood all of that. David moved into the final section of the piece, his playing built in intensity, growing stronger and more powerful. His hands crashed down on the keys for the dramatic chords, then flew back up for the delicate passages. The contrast was stunning. Power and gentleness, strength and vulnerability, all woven together into something beautiful. Mrs. Hartley gripped the armrests of her seat. Her heart was pounding. She'd made a lot of decisions in her career. Some good, some not so good. But she knew, right at this moment, that whatever happened next would be important. This young man had walked in here expecting nothing, and he was about to get everything. David's fingers struck the final chord with perfect timing. The sound filled the auditorium one last time, then slowly faded into silence. He sat there for a moment, his hands still resting on the keys, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Sweat had formed on his forehead, and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Playing that piece had taken everything he had. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. David didn't dare turn around. He'd poured his heart into that performance, and now he was terrified to see the reaction. What if they still didn't think it was good enough? What if they thought he'd just gotten lucky, memorized something without really understanding it? Then he heard it, a chair scraping against the floor, someone standing up. David finally turned around on the piano bench. Mrs. Hartley was on her feet, and her face looked completely different than it had 15 minutes ago. Her eyes were red, and she was shaking her head slowly, like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just witnessed. "Where?" she said, and her voice was trembling. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Before David could answer, Professor Williams stood up too. The old man's face had gone pale. He walked toward the stage slowly, like his legs weren't quite working right. When he reached the steps, he climbed them carefully and crossed to where David sat. "Young man," Williams said, and his voice cracked slightly, "I need you to explain something to me. I've been teaching piano for 33 years. I've trained students at some of the finest conservatories in the world. And what you just did." He paused, searching for words. "That wasn't just talent. That was something I don't even have a name for." David's hands were shaking now. Not from playing, but from the emotion of the moment. I just played it the way I heard it in my head, sir." Dr. Chen had stood up too. She walked to the stage and looked at David with an expression of pure curiosity. "Your grandmother," she said. "You mentioned she taught you the basics. Tell us about her." Trine Zai." David took a deep breath. This was the part he'd been afraid to talk about, because talking about his grandmother always made him emotional. But these people deserved to know. They'd given him a chance to play, and now they wanted to understand. "Her name was Helen Cooper," David began. "But in Korea, she was known as Ji Young Park. She was a concert pianist back in Seoul. She performed in major concert halls, won competitions, the whole thing." Mrs. Hartley sat back down, but she was leaning forward now, listening intently. The staff members in the back rows had moved closer too, not wanting to miss a word. "She came to America in 1972, David continued. "She thought her degree and her experience would matter here, but nobody cared. She applied to orchestras, to music schools, to anywhere that might need a pianist. Everyone told her the same thing. Her credentials didn't transfer. Her accent was too strong. She wasn't what they were looking for." David paused, swallowing hard. "So she got a job at a laundry service. She spent 30 years pressing other people's clothes. Those hands that used to play for thousands of people spent 3 decades working in industrial iron. Rachel, who was still recording everything, felt tears running down her face. Frank, the janitor, had moved even closer, standing at the edge of the middle section, completely absorbed in the story. But she never forgot, David said, his voice getting stronger. She kept one keyboard, an old Yamaha that she'd brought from Korea. She hid it in the back of her closet because my grandfather thought it was foolish to hold on to the past. But twice a week, when he was at his night job, she'd pull it out and teach me. How old were you? Dr. Chen asked gently. Started when I was 7. She taught me until I was 12. Then she had a stroke. David's voice got quieter. She died 3 days later. The last thing she said to me was, "Don't stop playing. Promise me you won't stop." The auditorium was so quiet now that you could hear the ventilation system humming softly overhead. Mrs. Hartley had her hand over her mouth. Professor Williams had sat down on the edge of the stage, suddenly looking very old and very tired. After she died, David continued, I didn't have money for lessons. My parents were working 2 jobs each just to keep food on the table. My younger brother and sister needed things for school. Piano lessons weren't even a possibility to consider. So what did you do? Mrs. Hartley asked softly. I went to the library every day after school. They had books about music theory, about piano technique, about the great composers. I read everything they had. Then I'd go home and practice on that old Yamaha keyboard, trying to apply what I'd learned. David stood up from the piano bench and walked to the front of the stage. When I was 16, I discovered I could sneak into the university practice rooms late at night. There was a security guard who'd let me in if I came after midnight. His name was Robert, and he said the rooms just sat empty anyway. So, what was the harm? For 7 years, I'd finish my homework, wait until everyone was asleep, then ride my bike 3 miles to the university. I'd practice from midnight until 5 in the morning, then ride home, shower, and go to school. On weekends, I'd practice even longer. Professor Williams shook his head in disbelief. 7 years? Yes, sir. When I graduated high school, I started working at the warehouse to help my family. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was actually perfect because the university practice rooms were available in the late afternoon. I'd sleep a few hours after work, practice for 3 or 4 hours, sleep a bit more, then go back to work. That's insane, Rachel whispered, though she didn't mean for anyone to hear her. I didn't have a teacher, David said, but I had YouTube. I'd watch videos of the great pianists performing, studying their hand positions, their techniques, the way they interpreted different pieces. I'd watch the same video 50 times, 100 times, until I understood what they were doing. Dr. Chen walked closer to the stage. What about sheet music? How did you get the music to learn? The library again. And free websites. Some people post classical sheet music online for free. I'd print them out at the library computer, a few pages at a time, because you could only print 10 pages a day for free. It took me 2 weeks to print out the complete Rachmaninoff concerto. Mrs. Hartley stood up again. She climbed the steps to the stage and walked right up to David. Up close, he could see that she'd been crying. Her mascara had run slightly, leaving small, dark traces under her eyes. David, she said, and it was the first time she'd used his first name. Do you understand what you've just done? Do you have any idea what we just witnessed? David shook his head. I just played the piano, ma'am. I played it the way my grandmother taught me to feel the music, not just read it. No, Professor Williams said, standing up from where he'd been sitting on the stage. You did something that shouldn't be possible. The technical skill alone would take most students 5 years to develop with daily professional instruction. The emotional maturity in your playing is something some pianists never achieve. And you did all of this alone, with no guidance, no support system, no resources. I wasn't completely alone, David said quietly. I had my grandmother's voice in my head, telling me to keep going. And I had Robert, the security guard, who believed in me enough to break the rules. And I had the hope that maybe, someday, I'd get a chance like this. Mrs. Hartley looked at the other panelists, then back at David. Something had shifted in the room. The young man who'd walked in 15 minutes ago to mockery and dismissal was now standing in front of them as something entirely different. A mystery. A miracle. A reminder that talent doesn't always come wrapped in expensive clothes with fancy credentials. Mrs. Hartley walked to the edge of the stage and looked out at the empty auditorium. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Behind her, David stood nervously, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he could feel that something important was coming. Finally, Mrs. Hartley turned around. David, I need to make a phone call. Don't go anywhere. Professor Williams, Dr. Chen, can you both stay for a few more minutes? I'm not going anywhere, Williams said firmly. Not after what I just heard. Mrs. Hartley pulled out her phone and walked to the side of the stage. David could hear her talking, but couldn't make out the words. She sounded excited. Urgent even. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes, but to David, it felt like an hour. When she came back, there was a strange look on her face, determination mixed with something else, maybe fear, maybe excitement. It was hard to tell. David, she said, I've been the director of this performing arts center for 27 years. In that time, I've given out 143 scholarships to talented students. Every single one of those scholarships followed the same rules. Full tuition, access to practice rooms, and 2 years of study with our master teachers. David nodded. Not sure where this was going. But here's the problem, Mrs. Hartley continued. Those scholarships don't cover living expenses. They don't pay for food, or rent, or bills. Students either have to have family support or work part-time jobs. And given your situation, working part-time while studying full-time wouldn't be enough, would it? No, ma'am, David admitted. I'd probably still need to work nights to help my family, which means you'd be exhausted all the time. You wouldn't be able to practice as much as you need to. You wouldn't be able to fully develop your gift. Mrs. Hartley looked at Professor Williams and Dr. Chen. We can't let that happen. We can't let financial problems stop something this special. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Elizabeth, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, Mrs. Hartley said slowly, that the regular rules don't apply here. I just called the chairman of our board of directors. I told him what happened today, and I asked him for approval to create something we've never done before. David's heart was beating so hard he thought everyone could probably hear it. I want to offer you a full fellowship, David. Not just tuition. Everything. We'll cover your living expenses, your books, your meals. Enough money that you can quit your warehouse job and focus completely on your music. We'll give you your own practice room with a piano you can use any time, day or night. And I'll personally mentor you. The words hung in the air. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Professor Williams, then at Dr. Chen, then back at Mrs. Hartley, sure that he must have misunderstood. I don't, David's voice cracked. I don't understand. That's not. The poster at the library said. Forget what the poster said, Mrs. Hartley interrupted. The chairman approved it. He said if I believed in you this much, then he'd trust my judgment. But David, you need to understand what this means. This fellowship has never existed before. I'm creating it specifically for you. That means there will be attention. People will want to know who you are and why we broke our own rules. Professor Williams walked over and put his hand on David's shoulder. Son, what Elizabeth is offering you is extraordinary. In all my years in this profession, I've never seen anything like it. But she's right about the attention. Once word gets out, and it will get out, people are going to talk. Let them talk, Dr. Chen said firmly. This young man deserves this opportunity. Anyone who heard what we just heard would agree. David's legs suddenly felt weak. He sat down on the piano bench before he could fall down. I don't know what to say. I can't believe this is real. Rachel, who'd been watching from the front row, spoke up for the first time. Mrs. Hartley, I recorded David's performance. With your permission, I think we should share it. People need to see this. Mrs. Hartley turned to David. That's up to you. Rachel's right that this performance is remarkable. But sharing it online means your life will change very quickly. Are you ready for that? Unresser. Engrammed Resser. Unresser. Unresser. David thought about his grandmother. He thought about all those nights, sneaking into the university. All those hours of practice, when his fingers hurt so bad, he wanted to cry. He thought about every person who'd ever told him he was wasting his time, that music was a nice hobby but not a real career. My grandmother used to say that hiding your light doesn't serve anyone, David said quietly. She said, if you have a gift, you have a responsibility to share it. So, yes, I'm ready. Mrs. Hartley nodded. Then we'll post the video tomorrow. But first, there's something else we need to discuss. Professor Williams, you said earlier that you teach at the Manhattan Conservatory. I know you usually don't take private students anymore. Williams smiled. I was about to offer. David, I'd be honored to work with you. Between Elizabeth's mentoring and my technical guidance, we'll help you reach your full potential. I don't understand why you're all being so kind to me, David said, and his eyes were filling with tears again. An hour ago, people were laughing at me. An hour ago, we didn't know, Mrs. Hartley said gently. We judged you by your appearance, by your lack of formal credentials, and that was wrong. But David, you need to understand something. The music world can be cruel. There will be people who say, you don't deserve this fellowship. There will be critics who try to tear you down. Classical music has a lot of gatekeepers who believe talent only counts if it comes through traditional paths. Let them come, Professor Williams said with surprising fierceness. I'll personally respond to anyone who questions this decision. What we witnessed today was genuine artistry, the kind that can't be faked or manufactured. Frank, the janitor, who'd been standing quietly in the back this whole time, walked down the aisle. Everyone turned to look at him. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with weathered hands and kind eyes. Excuse me, Frank said hesitantly. I know, I'm just the janitor here. And maybe I shouldn't say anything. But I've been cleaning this building for 15 years. I've heard hundreds of concerts and auditions. And what this young man just did, it made me cry. It reminded me why music matters. So whatever you folks decide to do for him, I think it's the right thing. David stood up and walked over to Frank, extending his hand. Thank you, sir. That means more to me than you know. Frank shook his hand firmly. You keep playing like that, son. The world needs more beauty in it. Mrs. Hartley checked her watch. It was almost 7:30 in the evening. They'd been in this auditorium for over an hour, though it had felt like both minutes and days at the same time. David, I need you to come back tomorrow at 10 in the morning. We'll have paperwork to sign, details to work out. You'll need to give notice at your warehouse job. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. I work tonight, but I can tell them tomorrow that I'm leaving. Good. And David? Bring your family if you want. Your parents, your siblings. They should be part of this moment too. As David walked back up the aisle toward the exit, his mind was spinning. He kept expecting to wake up, to find out this was all a dream. But it was real. The fellowship was real. The opportunity was real. His entire life had just changed in the space of 15 minutes. Rachel caught up with him in the lobby. David, wait. I wanted to show you something. She pulled out her phone and played back part of the video she'd recorded. Look at your face when you were playing. You can see every emotion. It's incredible. David watched himself on the small screen, barely recognizing the person he saw. That person looked confident, lost in the music, completely alive. Can I ask you something? Rachel said. When you were playing, what were you thinking about? David smiled. My grandmother. I was thinking that she'd be proud. That all those hours she spent teaching a little kid on an old keyboard actually mattered. That her dream didn't die when she had to give up performing. It just took a different path. She'd be more than proud, Rachel said softly. She'd be amazed. David pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the rainy evening. The rain had slowed to a drizzle now. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the sky, letting the cool drops hit his face. Tomorrow, everything would start changing. The video would go online. Word would spread. His quiet life would become something else entirely. But tonight, right now, he just wanted to feel this moment. Rachel posted the video at 9 o'clock the next morning. She'd spent half the night editing it, making sure the sound quality was perfect, adding simple text at the beginning that explained what people were about to see. The description was straightforward. Self-taught pianist David Cooper. Auditions at Riverside Performing Arts Center. He'd never had formal training. Watch what happens. By noon, the video had 3,000 views. By 3 in the afternoon, it had 50,000. By the time David went to bed that night, it had crossed 2 million. The comments section exploded with responses from musicians, teachers, and regular people who'd been moved by what they saw. I've been teaching piano for 20 years, and I'm crying, one comment read. This is what pure talent looks like. Another said, my daughter quit piano lessons because she said it was too hard. I just showed her this video. She's asking to start again. A famous concert pianist from Germany commented, whoever this young man is, someone needs to help him. This is extraordinary. But they didn't know that help had already arrived. David woke up the next morning to dozens of messages on his phone. News websites wanted interviews. Music blogs wanted his story. A producer from a morning talk show asked if he'd be willing to come on and play live. His younger sister Amy burst into his room at 7 in the morning, holding her phone. David, you're famous. Everyone at school is talking about you. The video has 5 million views. David sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. At 10 o'clock, just like Mrs. Hartley had asked, David and his family arrived at the Performing Arts Center. His mother kept crying happy tears. His father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, kept patting David's shoulder and saying, I'm proud of you, son. Over and over. Amy and his younger brother Tyler couldn't stop staring at everything, amazed by the fancy building. Mrs. Hartley met them in her office with a stack of papers. Before we sign anything, she said, I need to tell you what's been happening. The video has gone viral. We've received calls from journalists, from other music schools, even from recording labels. David, your life is about to change dramatically. I saw the video has millions of views, David said. I still can't believe it. Believe it, Professor Williams said, walking into the office. I've had 15 colleagues contact me since yesterday, all wanting to know about you. The classical music world is small, and word travels fast. Over the next hour, they discussed the details of the fellowship. David would receive enough money each month to cover his rent, food, and basic expenses. He'd have access to the center's facilities 7 days a week. He'd study with both Mrs. Hartley and Professor Williams. They'd also arranged for him to take some academic classes at the local university to round out his education. There's one more thing, Mrs. Hartley said. We've been invited to host a special showcase concert in 3 weeks. It's a fundraising event for the center. And we usually bring in professional musicians. This year, I'd like you to perform. David's eyes went wide. 3 weeks? In front of people? Real people paying to be there? Yes. And David, it will be a full house. 400 seats. After that video, people will want to see you play in person. David's mother squeezed his hand. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of David's life. He quit his warehouse job, which was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time since he was 18, He didn't have to work nights. He could sleep normal hours. He could practice during the day. Professor Williams came to work with him 3 times a week. The old teacher was tough but fair, helping David refine techniques he'd taught himself. "You've built an impressive foundation on your own," Williams told him. "But there are small things, efficient ways of moving your hands, approaches to difficult passages that will make you even better." Mrs. Hartley focused on the emotional side of performing. "You already have the ability to make people feel something," she said. "Now we need to make sure you can do that consistently, even when you're nervous or tired." David practiced 6 hours a day, sometimes more. But now, it was different. He had a beautiful practice room with tall windows and a gorgeous Steinway grand piano. He didn't have to sneak in at midnight. He didn't have to feel guilty for taking up space. This was his place now. He belonged here. The video kept spreading. By the end of the first week, it had 15 million views. News outlets picked up the story. "Self-taught janitor's son stuns music world." Read one headline. David did a few phone interviews, trying to stay humble while also sharing his grandmother's story. Robert, the security guard who'd let David into the university practice rooms for all those years, saw one of the interviews. He showed up at the Performing Arts Center one afternoon with tears in his eyes. "I knew you had something special," he told David. "I just knew it." The night of the showcase concert arrived. David stood backstage in new clothes that Mrs. Hartley had insisted on buying for him. A proper concert suit. Black and elegant. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. His family sat in the 3rd row. Amy kept bouncing in her seat with excitement. His mother held his father's hand tightly. They'd never imagined their son would perform in a place like this. The auditorium filled up quickly. Every seat was taken. People stood along the back wall. Some had driven hours to be there. The local news had sent a camera crew. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was an event. Mrs. Hartley walked onto the stage to introduce him. 3 weeks ago, a young man walked into this building for an audition. He was the last audition of a very long day. He didn't look like much. Also, A.T. Mutcherside. He had no formal credentials. No impressive resume. Some people in that room were ready to dismiss him before he played a single note. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But then he sat down at the piano, Mrs. Hartley continued, and he reminded us all why we fell in love with music in the first place. The applause was deafening. David walked onto the stage, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He sat down at the piano and looked out at all those faces. 400 people, all here to listen to him. He found his family in the crowd. His mother was already crying. David placed his fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. He thought about his grandmother, about her wrinkled hands guiding his small fingers on that old keyboard. He thought about every late night, every sacrifice, every moment when he'd wanted to give up but kept going. Then he began to play. The music that came out wasn't just technically perfect. It was alive with everything David had experienced. The struggle, the hope, the pain of loss, the joy of finally being seen. Every note carried the weight of his journey. The audience didn't move. They barely breathed. For 20 minutes, David took them on a journey through Rachmaninoff's concerto, making them feel every emotion he'd poured into those keys. When he finished, the silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then the entire auditorium exploded. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering. The ovation went on for 5 minutes. David stood and bowed, overwhelmed, grateful, and completely transformed from the nervous young man who'd walked into an audition 3 weeks ago. Professor Williams was crying. Mrs. Hartley was beaming with pride. Frank, the janitor, who'd been given a special seat, was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. But the most important moment came after, when David walked off stage and his mother threw her arms around him. "Your grandmother was here," she whispered in his ear. "I felt her here." David nodded. unable to speak through his tears. In the following months, David's life became something he'd never imagined. He gave more concerts. He was featured in music magazines. Other young musicians started reaching out, asking for advice, inspired by his story. But David never forgot where he came from. He started a program at the Performing Arts Center, offering free lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. He visited schools in poor neighborhoods, telling students that talent doesn't care about money or credentials. And every time he sat down at a piano, he whispered a quiet thank you to his grandmother, the woman who'd started it all with an old keyboard and a dream that refused to die. A year after that first audition, David performed at Carnegie Hall. The kid who'd been mocked as he sat at the piano had proved something important to the world. That real talent can come from anywhere. That dedication and passion matter more than fancy schools. That sometimes, the most extraordinary things come in the most ordinary packages. And every single person who'd been in that auditorium the day of his audition knew they'd witnessed something special. The moment when one perfect note changed everything.